I was still impressed that somebody took the time to not only research the company, but to find information about me personally and about the team. That was good.
3 stages, when we think about interview process, there's the actual interview itself, and then there's post. Maybe thinking about this in terms of our movie background, pre-production and production and post-production. We've interviewed hundreds of people throughout our careers as executives at companies like Disney and Netflix. And today we're going to share the difference between those we hired and those we didn't, so you can adopt the top interviewee traits. This is the way to crush your interviews like a top performer. Professor Nazarian, what is the biggest mistake you see interviewees make?
I would say for me was coming across as not interested, because it just seemed like they're going through the motion and they're not really hungry for the role. That's probably the biggest kind of red flag that I got initially, and a mistake I think people should avoid.
Yeah, you know what? I think that is a great one. One of the interesting things that I learned or saw at Netflix while I was there is that oftentimes if people were actually applying, because this isn't even in the interview, but it gives people the same sense, is if people were applying to like 10 roles, sometimes people would look at that as though you're not really interested in one role. You're just interested in getting in anywhere here. And they wanted to know somebody wanted that specific role. So sometimes that actually worked against them to even get in the door for the interview, let alone, I think, as you said, if they kind of show up and it's like, why are you even here? So I think both of those are important. I'd also add just not preparing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you have to be prepared, do your research. I really liked when people would come in. There were some articles about my teams written online, and people that came and actually used the data in those articles. I was like, oh, this guy did the research. So it was impressive, even though it's such a simple thing to do. I was still impressed that somebody took the time to not only research the company, but to find information about me personally and about the team. That was good.
I agree. And then you could see how they light up around it or don't too, which is another thing. Because if they light up around the things you're talking about, you're like, okay, you might have somebody who would fit well within your team culture. When I was doing a little bit of research, one of the stats I came up with is that the average number of interviews per job is between 10 and 20 per ultimately role, meaning that, every time they're bringing in candidates to a role, it's 10 to 20 people they may bring in for each one. So if you make it to the interview stage, you have 10 to 20 people that ultimately you got to beat, let alone, I mean, you and I experience this. There could be at least 100 or more sometimes that get, I don't want to say weeded out through the process with a recruiter. So you got to enter these things knowing that in essence, you're competing against 10 to 20 other people once you get let in the door. And that's really important for people to remember. Another interesting thing actually on today's topic, I don't know if you remember this, but there was this hiring tool you and I started developing, years ago while we were at Disney. Do you remember it?
I do. Because I think we were personally frustrated that Disney didn't have like this tool across the company to help people interview better, know what questions to ask, to try to ask questions to tie back to culture or interest. So we were trying to come up with a tool for our own departments. So it wasn't like this, just shooting from the hip questions that hiring manager. Because what I also saw was people would get to the manager level, which means now they manage people. And very quickly after that, they were interviewing. Like, this person has never interviewed in their life before. How could they all of a sudden be put in a position to interview without any training or tools? That frustration, I think, led to us trying to think about, I think it was our entrepreneurship mindset when it's here. We're like, how do we solve this problem? Because the problem, we want to hire good people, but we can't interview everybody. So how do we arm our teams to, bring in the best people?
And you know what? It's also so important because, I mean, to your point, when you're thinking about training team members, like oftentimes people just almost assume somehow that you're supposed to have that skill or the capabilities to be able to hire. And it's not easy. And, between asking the right questions to making sure that depending on how you want to break out, like, let me just actually share it. Netflix, what I really liked that they did there that was interesting is you'd have these two different panels, and generally, and those panels, each of them would be made up of 4 people, 30 minutes each. You'd come in and you'd interview with, like, one after another of 4, and then you'd come back again if you were brought back to the second set of interviews. But in that, in advance of each one, the individual who was hiring manager, would end up sending to these 4 different individuals, "Hey, Artin, I need you to really evaluate that so and so Sarah is a good culture fit. Please, when you interview, make sure that you understand that they're going to fit, either culture in general, or you might actually hone in more and say curiosity. I need you to drill on this." And then you might go after that and be like, "Hey, okay, over here, Chris, I need you to please focus and make sure that when Sarah comes in, that you're making sure Sarah's a good technical fit and that Sarah can do the job technically." And you break it down that way so that you have these people all looking for it. Then you, as a leader, has your own set of it. And then through that, everybody then had a tool that they eventually answered and put back and gave, in essence, a rating of how they think that the person would do, whether or not they would hire him, basically, or not. You had all that context information, what they left behind, now as a leader to take and make a decision. And for you and I at Disney, when we were thinking about what to build, it was a similar sort of thing in solution to
It
that,
literally
because
was. Yeah,
yeah,
that's what it was.
it just, we didn't know it existed. So anyway, and I think what more companies could do better is make sure that the team members are armed with that, because that's not something they really teach you in college either. It's not like usually a thing where it's like, okay, let's teach you how to interview. So you have to learn it on the job. So it's a super important skill. But anyway, who knows if we'll ever go back to that one? It sounds like there's some things on the market now, but we could probably help to put some resources together for some of the listeners so that maybe they could leverage some of our favorite questions themselves.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that, and we'll link it in the comments or the caption area.
Awesome. All right. So, question here too. What do you feel personally? I just mentioned at Netflix, you might have 4 interviews as for the first panel, another 4 in the second panel. Between there, you might have your hiring manager at least once, if not twice, and then often a recruiter as well in there, or somebody from HR. So I think I'm counting up 10, 11 there. What do you think is the right number of interviews, or how many interviews should somebody have to go through when they're going in to try to get a job?
I would say, excluding that kind of initial recruiter conversation, that's it's not really an interview. I think that recruiter is just trying to get a sense of where you at, if you're interested, what your potential compensation might be, just to get you through. Excluding that one, I think 3 to 4 is ideal. Anything more than that just seems overkill. Um, and dragging the process along. Like, if the hiring managers are clear on what they want and there's a need for a role, then just let's go. Let's just get it done. Why get 10 rounds of interviews?
The internet seems to agree with you. 3 or 4 is also what was
Okay.
put out there for myself. And again, having experienced the way that Netflix did it, what I really appreciated is oftentimes during an interview, you don't know whether or not what a person is sharing with you is actually how they feel, for lack of a better way to put it, or whether or not they're just telling you that because they want to tell you that. So, what I often find is, and because they did them in these batches, you could have some information that came out of it that you wanted to further assess. So, what was great with the follow up, then you do afterwards, is you could then have somebody kind of further drill down. In fact, you might even give them some feedback in advance to see how well they, for example, if somebody says, "I don't think they're going to be really good at receiving feedback," you could then actually, when they come back in, give them feedback in advance and then have that person see how well they did about taking that feedback. So that's why sometimes for me, the 3 to 4, I think that because 3 to 4 hours, I mean, 3 to 4 meetings can only be two, an hour and a half to 2 hours worth of meetings. And I don't know, to me, it's kind of like, in this case, I look at it as dating. You don't want to, this is dating. So you get to know somebody for both parties, for, both the person who's trying to get the job, but also the company trying to hire it. So for me, sometimes that, even though I understand people think that 1.5 or 2 hours might be adequate, to me, it's like, man, imagine somebody telling you you have to go and choose who you're going to marry after one date. That's what it feels like to me. So I do think a few more is beneficial, but I get it. And especially if it doesn't feel like people are using those very well. And when we get through some of the specific things people should be doing, I'll share a story about where I do think it was overkill. And in those cases, you could lose a lot of hires or faith in the company if you do this approach. I'll share a little bit later.
Yeah. Um, I mean, obviously, I think when we say 3 to 4, at least for me, that's an average. Depending on the role, it could be different. Do you, follow Robin's Story
No.
on LinkedIn? Her company does, resume writing, to kinda help people. But she always posts a lot of great stories, around this topic, and one I recently read was it's like a 120,000-ish, that kinda range type of role, and the person has over 10 years of experience, has already gone through 4 rounds, and they're asking him to go through another 2 to 4 rounds, and then there might be an offer or not. Like, to me, for a $120,000 role to go through 6 to 8 rounds, that's like, come on, that's just crazy. Now, if you're talking about a COO role in a large company or corporation, then yes, I get it. Maybe you need 6 rounds because that's very a significant role. But I love, she posts a lot of real stories like that she gets around how many rounds of interviews her clients are going through. And it's just crazy to see the number sometimes.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I'll have to take a look because sometimes I feel like it could be that higher level role, though, that sometimes based on the track record and because they were a public figure already, somebody might be like, well, we know what we're getting here. And then sometimes in that case, I feel like I might be one of those over a dinner sometime. You interested? Let's do this. But I get what you're saying. Kind of like entry level for sure. For me, it's like 3 to 4 feels like too much because it's like, look, what are your expectations here? You're not having somebody apply for um, something that's great at entry. Although maybe at some point we get into that too, because a lot of people abuse the word entry level these days, and they'll call something entry level, and they're like entry level,
8 years of
required.
experience.
Yeah, exactly. MBA. Yeah, I mean, depending on, and I guess in some cases, I guess maybe those do exist that you really require, but it sounds a bit crazy. So, all right. So let's walk through the ultimately 3 stages. When we think about the interview process, there's sort of there's the actual interview itself, and then there's post. Maybe thinking about this in terms of our movie background, pre-production, and production, and post-production. But I like
Or
in
like a
terms,
story, beginning,
yeah,
middle, and end.
exactly. And I think it works well that way because the meat of it happens in the middle there, but it's the beginning and the end are important. So in this case, let's talk about like how top interviewees versus average interviewees, the different approaches that they take, and ultimately the mistakes that we feel that the habits of those who are not very good with these interviews, the average, if you will, versus those who are actually standing out as top interviewees. So let's start in the prep stage. If you wanted to start, what are some habits of average, interviewees?
I think you mentioned one of them is like just applying for hundreds of jobs and hoping that one sticks. Now, I get certain times might be different. Like there might be a lot of people in the marketplace now, especially in the tech sector right now. But it still feels like if you're just throwing darts and hoping something sticks, that's a bad approach.
Yeah, I agree. It's like playing career lottery in a way here, and I think um, I get it also why people might do that. And sometimes somebody might say, well, what if I just really want to work for the company? Okay. It still might be best knowing that way that a lot of, companies might look at it as though you're just spamming in essence, is to try to start reaching out and developing these relationships with these individuals. Because if instead somebody submits you internally for a role, that looks different than if you're just trying yourself to apply for every role. Cool. And that's what's going to help you anyway. And I think the last um, recording that we had here, depending on when it gets released, we talked about a little bit more about how people can actually position themselves for roles. So that could be useful to look at for this. I would say that another one is, one resume to fit them all. So there's a lot of people who, they just create a resume and then it's like, here, let's just get this out there. But you need to, or you should personalize that based on the role, so that it's more relevant, because that increases your chances. And theoretically here, maybe this shouldn't even be here because, well, at this point, hopefully they're getting in for the interview. But I still think it's important because it's going to feed some of the questions and the quality of the questions when you end up going in person for the interview. And I think what somebody should do in advance of even getting that interview is if they would have made some adjustments, and you could use ChatGPT today to be able to say, hey, here's the job description, here's my resume. Please highlight anything that I'm not speaking to well enough in this resume so that I can highlight it here, or please rework it so that those items are in here, or both. So it's not overly difficult to do, but I get it for people who are just hitting 100 jobs that they're applying for and possibly 20 of them at one company. Yes, that's why it feels so difficult. But again, it's about quality, not quantity, because quantity, you'll get there eventually, but you just have to ask yourself, are you okay having to get, if it's quantity, you might need 100 for every one interview you get. If it's quality, you might only need 10 for every one interview you get. And I think that's an important thing for people to determine.
The one thing to add to that from my perspective, you know, sure, one resume is not going to work. With ChatGPT, lazy is not an excuse anymore because you could do it. But maybe you don't need 100 unique resumes. Maybe you need 5 or 10. But it actually is not that easy if you're applying to a bunch of jobs at the same company or
Yeah.
even separate companies. If your experience doesn't match to a new type of role, it doesn't matter how much you throw at it, it's not going to work. Usually, people that do a kind of a lateral or even a upward movement to a new area is by
Yeah.
connection network. It's very rare to do that type of move through like applying online. I've never seen that. It's always been through a connection that somebody says, "Hey, you were kicking ass here. I think your leadership is going to be very beneficial in this area. You don't have experience in this, but I trust in your abilities. Let's
Yeah.
go."
Yeah. You just lost us all our kids subscribers with that language, Uh, uh, all right. So no, it's great. We mentioned one more earlier about little time prepping is another mistake, but I think by mentioning some of the habits of top interviewees, we could tackle that one a little bit. So I think it's kind of in some cases, the opposite of everything we just mentioned. But if we run through it, first is honing in on specific companies and roles becomes important. And I think this helps with what you were describing too, with people and all the different resumes. Well, you really should have that resume specific to the types of role. So if you're trying different roles, there was somebody I was recently helping who, well, it turns out that they saw that they could do this role that might look like project management, or they could do this role that looked like an asset management role, or it's potentially that they could do this post coordinator type role. So, like in those examples, it's like, okay, yeah, those are all slightly different, but it's true they had the skill set to be able to handle all of those, but they'd want a different resume for each of those. But I think honing in specifically to the role and also the company, but not so they could spam them with every opening they have. Oh, engineering job. So I don't know how to code, but guess what? I want in. But in that case, at least they would be able to uh, then start looking at LinkedIn. And again, this is some of the stuff we had mentioned before, but start thinking about how do I connect with people at these companies to make it a little bit more of a relationship instead of just a shot in the dark.
I mean, that definitely the reverse of everything we talked about already over there. Not having research, so you should be researching. So the good habits are people that are researching and understanding not only the company but the department they works for, which is what I kind of mentioned at the top of the episode about people researching me personally when they were coming for an interview. And then just having a set of questions that they want to ask. So they're kind of making it not a one-way street, but it's a two-way thing because it is. And the hiring process should be a two-way thing. It shouldn't be just a one way with the company having all leverage. So just coming prepared with those set of questions is critical.
And which is what you just said is so important. So I just want to highlight again is too often people go into an interview, and I get it at times. It may feel like, oh, I need this job or I want this job. But you've got to remember that you want this job if it's going to also be a good match for you. And that comes down to values at times. It comes down to what you're trying to achieve. Um, there will always be other jobs out there. And again, we don't know each person's situation. They have to make the call on their own. But it's so important that they enter these conversations realizing they're also interviewing the company. It's not just the company interviewing them, they're interviewing the company as well. And maybe what we could do is follow this up with kind of a list of some good questions to help people to consider to ask that helps them determine if the company is a good fit for them. They could pick and choose, as well as just some good questions to show up to what you were alluding to before too, which is that um, individuals should be asking questions that show their interest in the company and the culture, and which is why you want to look at the website and do other things. Or again, somebody could, I say cheat, it's not cheating, but you could use ChatGPT, at least the version, it's connected to the internet, and say, hey, find me some really interesting questions about this company based on what they have on their website. And there's an assortment of things that people could do, but you want to make sure you go in there. For me, when I did have the multiple interviews at Netflix, I did go in knowing each person that I was going to talk to and had specific questions around them, even down to the fact that I found one of them did a TED talk. So of course I'm like, that's incredible. You want to be careful that you're not going too far down that pathway and that it sounds like you're just um, trying to be, I don't know, kiss up brown nose, however you want to say. And that wasn't my goal there. It was really something I was engaged with, but people have to find that right balance because they may otherwise look a little sus, as my boys would say, suspect. So I think the one other thing I'd say is, and check your own network to see if you have any connections
Oh,
into
yeah.
you're going to interview.
That's a good one.
Because if you do, this is the great chance to activate those individuals. Hey, I have a resume, or hey, I have an interview coming up in 2 days or in a week. First off, ask them, any insights on this person you can tell me? They might be like, oh, the person is a huge fan of Lakers, at which point Arden's like, yes, I got this one in the bag. But um, but they could give you some insights, but at the same time, if you've nurtured that relationship right, then that person might be like, dude, that's a friend of mine, or I know them actually pretty well. We work together. Let me send them a note and let them know how great it is to work with you. Because if you go in with that, the person in their mind you already have an advantage. You've stepped up in their mind versus all of the other candidates. So activate your network whenever you can.
Yeah. It's funny about that whole process.
What's that?
That is what really good sales and business development people do,
Yeah.
is activating the network. So when you're trying to land the role, you're selling yourself. So you have to become your own sales rep and your own business development rep. And that is what the good ones know how to do. So it's not just a skill for landing jobs. It's actually useful in many other areas.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. A really great point. We're gonna move on to the interview stage here. So in this case, just a couple of quick ones to highlight as the bad habits. Well, showing up late. It's still always surprising how many people show up late for interviews. And I mean, again, life happens. I get it. I'm usually not somebody who's a complete jerk about it. I'm not. It's not how I want to show up, and I still want to give the person the best chance. But it doesn't set them up on good footing. But if you're going to do it, at least make sure you own it. And it doesn't sound like some crazy excuse that you're trying to make. Just be like, I'm so sorry. I was, late. Like, don't even try to go down when somebody starts saying stuff like they can dig their own hole, when they're starting being like, well, it's just traffic, was bad. And then, I got like, it just all starts to sound like, okay, you're just
Excuse.
yeah, instead of just owning it, because I want to hire somebody who I know owns it. You know what? Traffic wasn't just bad. You didn't provide yourself enough time to be able to make sure you were here and plan for the fact that there could be, some traffic. Again, I know there's some people probably listening who are like, how dare you? Maybe they were coming back from over from work. Look, there is exceptions and consider that. But I know so many of these people that I had interviewed before, it was definitely one of those things where I'm like, this was in your control.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'm now jumping ahead to more good habits, but I think it's connected. What I've noticed is they forget to plan for, because what usually people do, and this is not just during the interview process, this is just in life in general. They look at the map and says, oh, it's going to take me 30 minutes to get there. So I should leave 35 minutes before. What people forget to calculate for is there's parking, then I have to walk and find the space. And especially if it's a big campus, who knows, it might take me 15 minutes. I've seen so many people discount the fact that it's not just about what Google or Apple Maps tell you. You have to plan that 15, 20 minutes of time to actually figure out where you're going. And that's when usually people are late, because they haven't figured out, they don't know where to go. So you need the time.
Yeah, it's a great point. They've never been there before, and it's like you've got to understand what's it take to get through security. You don't know these things, and Again, I think that's examples before too. I've heard people say like, "Oh, I didn't realize I'd have to go through," and it's like, you know, either and usually HR and others were pretty good about preparing people for those, but don't ever assume that you have all the information. Plan to show up 30 minutes early. Heck, show up an hour early if you can. And I know again, sometimes it may not always be easy to do that, but it can look bad otherwise if you don't look like you're planning ahead, because that can tell that hiring manager that this is how you're going to approach your job in the future, which is not being on top of it. So
And, speaking of being late, there absolutely is zero excuse to be late if you have a virtual interview. Like, there's no, like, if you're doing a virtual with, or even a phone with a recruiter, it's not the hiring manager yet, and it's only a video, a Zoom or whatever, be 5 minutes early. Like, just be there and wait. Like, there's zero excuse if you're doing a virtual or a phone call.
yeah, I think it's a good point. I think that these days people may give you the 1 to 2 minute sort of thing virtually, but I think you're right. It's like plan to just be there, ready to go. It also can sometimes lead you with a different confidence when you're in that meeting and you're starting it where you were there in advance. Because if instead you're starting it behind the curve and you're coming in and feeling like somebody else was already there and now you're late, and that messes with your psyche. So it's another huge benefit to be able to have that.
Yeah, and you start to fumble because, obviously a phone call, you probably don't need a prep. It's just a number. But if you're
Yeah.
doing a video interview, what if they ask you to use a company specific video call service? That you might need to download the software for, maybe sign up. Like, you might have to go through some steps, and you have to make sure your Wi-Fi is in a good shape. Or you connect it. Like, even though it's virtual, there's some setup that you have to do. And if you don't do it, you're going to be in this fumble and, oh my God, I'm so sorry. My Wi-Fi is down today. Those are all just signs of poor preparation. So please, just take time to get on that and download the app or whatever you got to do just to make sure that you're technically ready for that interview before it actually starts.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I'll admit what I've been guilty for. Not generally speaking for interviews, but sometimes if I am just jumping on a call, and we often, when it's friends or stuff like that, it's easy for us to be like, they'll understand. But I swear, like Zoom for me, every time I go to get on Zoom, it's like downloading new software. I'm like, it's like all the time. I never face that with Google when I'm using Google. So in that scenario, though, all the people on the other end, they're just waiting on you. So yeah, I think it's very important. Even the things that you think you could rely on because you're always using it, don't leave it to chances. So um, I think for virtual calls too, I think the other things for video calls is the other thing it's important at those times too, just to get to nitty gritty is, make sure that you're in a place that has good lighting. In advance, make sure also if you can test your audio, preferably consider your background and how it's set up. You don't have to have anything that feels a little more staged like what we have, but people at least maybe be less busy behind you in the background, have some sort of a white background, something that
The
doesn't,
lawnmower not going off in the background, maybe.
yeah, exactly. Whatever you can. Sometimes you may not be able to control that one because it might happen. But I think the things that you can do, at least remember, it's not just you in that case when you're doing video calls, but it's your surroundings that are representative of what you have. And yeah, it's true. If you have kiddos and they're at home, you need to work that out. There's a reason you and I plan these, schedule these podcasts and reschedule these podcasts sometimes, because when we know that that's going to happen otherwise, and it might, impact the quality, then we just want to be careful with that. You can only get away with the cute little kid who sits on your leg every now and then, but mine are too grown up for that now, so it doesn't work. Another thing that's important that sometimes I hate to say because you hope people would just get it is you do need to dress to slightly impress. I always like to dress to just be, slightly above where, whatever it is, most people would come in for the role. Or maybe if, say, it was a role that was a director level role, well, how did the VPs dress? Because I actually like to just dress it up just a little bit more. And yes, there are certain roles and artists and others who might get away with the t-shirt, but I'm like, you know what? It's just safer to go in with, if nothing else, a collar shirt's a nice, pair of khakis or something like that. And in some roles, it is the tie and it's going up, further, or in some cases, whether it is the business suit, for ladies, whether it is dress skirt, like whatever is normal for the company. And you can usually find that out in advance through certain channels with either hopefully your network, Otherwise, you could sometimes get guidance from even HR and others when you're going into there. But I had somebody once, when we talk about elongated number of interviews, they came in, and this is going to sound silly, but it's the reality. They were wearing just a polo shirt. And granted, the role they were going for was an engineer. So they're not ever going to have to, dress like much differently what they had based on a company. But it became this thing that held up one of the individuals interviewing so much that called into question, like, it's all people could focus on. And eventually the person did end up with the job. I was one who was pushing for it and be like, stop, look past that. They're completely capable of the role beyond that. But some people get stuck in it. So just don't let anybody get stuck in it. Show up in a way that, again, dress to slightly impress. These days you can usually get away not wearing a tie, but some industries you need the tie. So just consider what it is that's appropriate for the role.
Yeah. I think you have to accept the fact that biases exist. It's just human nature. So as much as you could do to reduce those biases, it becomes your advantage. And wearing a polo shirt is one of those, because you might run across somebody that's a little more old school. Like, what? Came to an interview in a polo shirt? Forget it. You just want to not allow those type of biases to work against you.
There are some people who might be like, well, I don't want to work for a company like that anyway. And you know what? If so, so be it. I hear you. But it may be that one individual that was on the panel who had the bias, but they just may be somebody who has a level of authority and they were given more weight than they needed to, such as even this case I'm thinking of here. And otherwise, it doesn't necessarily mean that the role and the boss you're going to have are be bad, but people got to find the right balance for them, and whether or not they're in that point where they're willing to be able to say, yeah, nope, forget about it, I'm out of here. Like, I see some people sometimes chime in somewhere and it's like, yeah, if they don't get back to me in 1 week with an answer and they get back to me after that, forget, it was rude, they made me wait too long. And I'm like, hey, I mean, if that's your criteria, then great. But I think, you've got to find what the right balance is for you. Just a couple other things to touch on here. And I know we had said earlier about the importance of somebody being able to, come in with those insightful questions, but reinforce that research that you do beforehand. This is where it comes in handy, because now you're going to be able to go in there and you're going to be able to show that you're serious for the role. You're really interested in it. You've done a lot of research for the role, and you're going to ask questions that show them that you're going to hit the ground running when you're here. You're going to ask them things that are like, okay, great. So how are you currently measuring? Like, you understand that you'll be responsible for driving sales and X. Okay, well, how do you guys currently go about measuring your success in that space? Or, ask specific questions about, if they're willing to share like their current numbers in an area, or what they've been doing recently to try to improve that. And you might even then be able to say, oh, have you tried this or that? And then through that, they might be like, oh, wow, these are things we, haven't yet. Or, oh, wow, this is great. I can see she's really, into this role, and this person can hit the ground running, because that's what they want to be able to see from you. What actually are some of your favorite? Actually, sorry, before I hit that, one of the things I want to say is it's so important for people to also, in the interview, not enough people do this, with asking, like, are there any reservations that you have about hiring me that I can address? And it's just that chance for the person to say, I know I've had a couple people ask me, and I always, asked it. And oftentimes they might say, no questions, actually, this was great. And it gives you a sense of how you did. Or they may say, yeah, I do wonder whether or not, you have the right technical skills, or whether or not you would be really good at the relationship side of things. And it gives you a chance to squash that before you leave that room with that in their mind as a perception that then goes down in writing. That is a concern, especially because in the future, if somebody's hiring you, they may read that same concern and be like, oh no, yeah, they said that this person might not be very good at interacting with other, human beings. And it's like, you might have come up on the wrong footing. So make sure you address that before it becomes part of your story.
I mean, this goes back to my comment around you're selling yourself. And, when you're selling a product or service, you eventually get to, well, what's stopping you from moving forward with buying this product or service? And that's where you start to address objections. Somebody, I don't have the money right now. This is exactly that question, but at a personal level. You might not always get the answer, because somebody might not want to actually be truthful about it. Uh, but it's still worth asking because you might get an honest answer that you can actually address on the spot instead of let it hang and it actually then dings against you because you never got the opportunity to address it.
Completely agree. Curious, what are do you have like any favorite questions you like to ask during interviews?
Yeah, during interviews, I ask a lot of kind of more general questions about cultural fit than specific about the job. Um, I definitely want to. I ask about what books uh, people have read. I like having conversations around that. I like asking around um, questions that could tease out a person's problem solving abilities or mindsets. And, are they an optimist? Are they a pessimist? Are they growth minded? Like those are the type of questions that I ask. There's one that I ask that sometimes sounds silly. I don't ask it all the time. It's only if it's the right timing. But I asked the person, okay, you just got in a car accident. You got hit from the rear. Uh, your car is damaged. What's the first thing that goes through your mind? And that conversation does point and tease out to me, is the person going to have like the victim mentality or are they the resourceful? And as soon as there was a crisis, they went into problem solving mode. I've gone into very interesting, like entire 30 minutes were just followed up by that question that I asked. And and I get into an interesting conversation, but I don't ask it all the time. But whenever I do, uh, it's usually been the right person I've asked, and it's been an interesting conversation.
I had a fun one I did at times about the zombie apocalypse because similarly, I wanted to see what would they do, and it was always interesting just to see people's thought process, how they do it. And there's some people who are just like, "No, I'm going home because the world's over," and there's others who are like, "Okay, well, first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to find a nearest Costco near a rural area because usually then you can survive on the food there while also escaping to the rural." It was always really interesting to see, but also it lets you know if they're willing to, be a bit carefree and have some fun, which again is important for certain roles. Everything you said out of the gate in the beginning was the same for me around like the books and understanding like growth mindset's really important for me and just mindset in general, like really understanding that and cultural fit. Those are key. And I think it makes sense for the type of roles that, we're hiring, especially when we were hiring people who are in manager or director, level roles, because, we know that ultimately they'll then ask, the right level questions based on what they need to do on a functional day to day basis. So, um, one of the other stories that I had heard before that I always thought was really interesting is about, I forget where I read this, but what the person did, the hiring manager, is they would actually schedule a lunch and a couple different things. I heard one story where they would actually ask the person, "Hey, do you mind picking me up outside of, wherever they were at, and then driving us to lunch?" Because now you're seeing how the person reacts when they're driving. Are they the person who gets upset when things happen? Are they cool, calm, and collected when it happens? Are they swearing at somebody else? Like you see people, they're in their element. So their kind of guard is down a little bit, that's why you let them drive. Um, but then also when they got to the restaurant, sometimes they would then go to a specific restaurant that this person chose because they would specifically make sure that the waiter waitress there actually messed up the order. Because now you're seeing how is this person going to deal. Like, I love
That's
it
a good
personally. Some people might be like, "That's too much and it's dishonest." But the reality is during interviews, you sometimes don't know if you're getting the real person either. So I think seeing that in the moment is great. I used to be a little bit picky. I mean, it wasn't like a deal breaker, but if people after interview for me didn't actually kind of like put things back like the way that they had them when they were came into the office, to me that does show this level of detail. And again, it's not a complete deal breaker, but it definitely is something where I'm like, I want to know that they're conscientious of other people's stuff and how they approach that. And I had heard another story where somebody at one point purposely had this paper on the ground and it said confidential on it. And does the person pick it up or do they leave it there during the interview? And when they do pick it up, do they pick it up and slide it on the desk so that they don't read it, or do they lift it up and look at it? Like, there's all these interesting things I hear some people do. I never took it quite to that level, but fascinating way to get into the human psyche to try to beat the defense of somebody who's trying to come in sometimes and do whatever it takes to get the role.
Yeah. I didn't purposely set this up, but in my, 20s, and maybe early 30s of when I was a single man,
Yeah.
uh, on a date, the way a girl interacted and treated the waiter or waitress was a huge sign for me of how they treat people in general. So yeah, definitely it works. It's just a human behavioral thing that it's beneficial in all areas of life.
And for what it's worth, your wife treats people very well. So there you go.
Yes.
Work. Yeah.
Yeah.
It works.
I actually have a funny story. She might kill me for saying this, but I'm going to tell the story anyways. So when Alice and I were first dating, few months into dating, it was her birthday. I decided, hey, we should like take a little weekend getaway trip, and we went to Vegas. In the airport, um, as we were first we were late at the Burbank airport, and as we're going through the security check, the TSA, for some reason she gets flagged. Uh, and knowing that we're late, I'm like, oh my God, we're going to miss the airplane. She was so calm and collected, and she actually laughed about the situation. I was like, oh, I like that. Then we get to the Vegas airport, and as I don't remember the exact detail, but something happened where uh, her jeans tore all of a sudden in the middle of the airport as we're walking to a cab. Again, she was just laughing about it. She's like, "Oh, it's Vegas. You know, it happens. I'm walking with, a hole in my pants." But just the way that she was handling it, the way she talked to the TSA agents, and how calm she was, I was like, I think I found the one. Obviously, I did because she became my wife but a year after that.
I love it. That's great. That's great. In future episodes, how to interview for your future spouse. No, but that's
How to interview their future
but
husbands and wives.
yeah, but I love it. But by the way, um, it does remind me one of the things that at Disney for a while there that some people would reference is they would actually refer to each other as a work wife or work husband because people spend so much time with someone there. So again, taking it back to why it is important to make sure you hire that right person because you've got yourself an arranged marriage for quite some time and you want to, make sure the team is equipped with the best team members that they can have. Let's move into post-interview stage now. So you walked out of that interview. You maybe crushed it, but you don't really know because, of course, sometimes you've got the other person on the other side being, thank you so much. We'll let you know. But again, if you ask that question about any reservations, you should hopefully get a sense from them if they say, I think we're good. Like if they seem what you but if they're like, no, you did, wonderful. Like it gets you a little bit of a sense going out there. Even if they do say, ask you something, you clarify, it doesn't mean things are bad. So you shouldn't assume things went bad because too often people do that. And then they're like, forget it. And they move on. But there's a couple of other things that people can do because a lot of average interviewees, they'll just wait and see, it's like, it's done. And if I hear back, no biggie. But, I would say that most people who I've had leave interviews leave it. And that is kind of the end of it. But the behavior I love to see and what I always did, maybe that's why I'm biased to seeing it, but either way is somebody following up with a nice thank you email. And it's also your chance to remind them of how excited you are and also why you're the best candidate for the role. And it really can help you stand out as somebody who's, again, a lot more conscientious and somebody who is super excited when the majority of people, less than 90, I'd say probably only 10%, if that, maybe even 5% usually did this step. So if you're able to do that, it makes you stand out a little bit more and it can give a little bit of doubt for, whoa, the other person didn't do this. Are they not as interested in this one? But you need to follow up with that thank you email. Some people did a card. Some people did both. I think an email is just fine. And now some people might say, but wait, how do I get the email? How would you answer that, Artin?
Ask the recruiter, or go to LinkedIn. I mean, finding the email is not that difficult. There's so many tools out there. But the easiest way is just go to your recruiter and say, "Hey, I would like to send a note to this such and such person. Can I get their email address?" And I've never seen anybody say, "No, I'm not going to give it to you."
Yeah, I agree. And I think today it's even easier at times too, because a lot of interviews, at least at a stage, can be video. And that actually means you've usually got it because of how they had to set up the event. So
Yeah,
it
the
makes it even
invite too.
easier.
Yeah, the invite.
It should.
Yeah, even if you're not there, the invite will have the thing. It's the other thing I
The
want to
important
add
thing is
is,
shows you're resourceful, by the way. And that's the key thing is like that I loved is I'm like, in fact, I didn't offer my email up or a card up. I wanted to see whether or not the person was resourceful afterwards because that told me a lot about what type of person I was getting in the role. And if a lot of this stuff sounds a little harsh, um, I mean, I think that's important for somebody else to look in that mirror on and just say, like, some people might be like, of course, this makes sense. But like, these are things that your interviewer is thinking about. And therefore, you need to make sure you're not dismissing it.
the other thing I want to add about the follow up email or card. Uh, it 100% does what Michael just talked about. The other thing that I think it does is you have to realize that everybody that you're interviewing with is super busy. It's very easy to forget. What that follow up email kind of acts like is a follow up without being a follow up. And all of a sudden, your name pops up in their inbox or in their mail. It's just a reminder. Well, yeah, I forgot. I need to tell the recruiter to set up a final interview. It just becomes a reminder for them as well. So it's more being like, don't be out of sight, out of mind. It just acts as a follow up without being a true follow up.
I agree. And actually, I think somebody should consider doing that 1 week later after that, if they still haven't heard back, just to just be like, hey, just wanted to check in, uh, see if there are any other questions that came up you guys want me to address. And otherwise, please don't take my excitement and eagerness against me. If they need to close it out with something like that, it's like, it only helps them.
The one thing that there was one person that I still remember because I am actually still in contact with this person. This goes back 10 plus years.
Yeah.
Uh, After the interview, I think he realized that he might be a little too junior for the role. I never said anything, but I think he realized that. So when he followed up with me, he said something along the lines of how much he appreciated the conversation. If things don't work out, he would love, in a month or 2 months from now, to take me out to lunch and then maintain a relationship because he would love like this unofficial mentor mentee type of thing. And we're still in contact today and we still chat, and that was the one person that ever did that in the 15 plus years that I've interviewed.
And you just nailed it. And that was actually going to be something I wanted to highlight because once more, people don't think about the benefits to that relationship going forward. This person now and doing it with you and being the only one who's done it, has now stood out in your mind as somebody who you would definitely consider. I have one person who's done that as well. I think mainly just one as well, which is just crazy. And guess what? That person now, if they ever need me, I'll jump on the phone and help them with something.
Yep. Same here. Same here.
yeah. And like, I think this is what people then need to consider is even when they get the no, they need to be able to say, hey, I totally, hey, congratulations on finding the perfect candidate for the role. If things don't work out, please know that I'm still very interested in this role. And I, whether you say I have a connection to you or whether you say, and I really think that I'd enjoy working with you too, which became a huge part of the draw for me. In fact, if you'd be okay with that, I'd love to still keep in touch. And back to what you said, the lunch, a coffee, and being able to do that and set that up, because guess what's going to happen is eventually, if you do have a role, you're going to remember this person. And even if there was something about this person where maybe they weren't qualified for some reason, you might realize now that they make up for it with some other skills or tenacity or whatever else that you're willing to do so. So that is critical because as we're saying here, less than 1% of people, if that, basically, even consider doing that. And I think this takes us full circle too, because if you want to, actually, before I go full circle, I think the other thing here that somebody can do in this stage is if they hadn't already activated all of their network that knows that person, this is one more thing. So instead of you having to follow up after that first week, you could instead reach out to the network, and then they could just give a reach out and be like, "Hey, how did it go? Yeah, I know he was talking to me the other day. He's sweating it. He's hoping to get, whatever it is like a way to say that. Because that's yet one more way to poke without poking. But taking it back to the full circle, I think the easiest way to get the job in the first place is to have a good. So back to it here. If you develop this, you're possibly developing that cycle for your next role that you decide to go to, because you don't know where things are going to go. That person there, sure, maybe you'll be a level ahead, but so might that person. And they may be building a team somewhere else, and they may remember you, and they may have had a bad experience with the other hire and, made them think, oh, I should have gone with this person. So that right there is a relationship building opportunity. It's not a no, it's a hello.
Exactly. Yeah. And with the way that just the world is today, you never know that the person you interview with next year, they actually now are starting their own company. And they're looking for people. And just that network is so beneficial. It might be the other way around. I mean, I've seen this happen where the person interviewing, they actually went off 2 years after that and started their own company, and now are reaching out because that network is there, asking questions about, hey, I'm starting a company. What advice would you give me? Like, there's so many benefits that come out of just building those relationships and network, and you just
I
don't know where it could lead you.
completely agree. Yeah, no, I think that is critical. And I think that back with what you just said as well, there's, as far as benefits you don't know, like there's also a good chance that that person might say, hey, um, I really like this person, even though they're not a fit for my role, because maybe they weren't the perfect fit for their role. But they may then tell their coworker or somebody else, hey, this person is. So like if you got in the door and you got to meet that person, you got to get there. It's like, make sure you,
Don't just
yeah,
don't do
take
one and
advantage.
done. Like, don't forget it.
Yeah.
Take advantage of it.
Yeah, I agree. So, I think that hits it here, and we just took it back, full,
Yeah, yeah.
circle. Anything else you'd want to add?
No, we would love to hear from you guys and from other people in leadership roles. What are other questions you guys ask that people want to be aware of? I think just having more people in leadership talk about this, it just helps people that are and up and coming. So I would encourage others to as they're hearing this episode to share their best practices, and of course, don't forget to share, subscribe, follow, and support us. Thank you so much.